The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Red Cloud, Nebraska, as Clara Richards staggered and fell to her knees, her trembling hands barely breaking her fall against the hard-packed dirt. For 3 years, she had endured Jeremiah Blackstone's brutal ranch regimen's 16-hour days, meager rations and constant belittlement, but today, her body had finally surrendered to exhaustion. It was 1878, and at 22, Clara had already weathered more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 17, she'd taken the first job offered cook and housekeeper at Blackstone Ranch, unaware of the living hell awaiting her. The relentless work had hollowed her cheeks and roughened her once soft hands, but hadn't dimmed the determined spark in her hazel eyes. "Get up, girl. Those supplies ain't gonna load themselves." Blackstone's voice cracked like a whip from atop his wagon, his weathered face twisted with impatience. I need a moment, Mr. Blackstone," Clara whispered, her voice raspy from thirst. "Worthless," he muttered, climbing down from his perch. "I give you food and shelter, and this is how you repay me." Lazing about in the middle of town, the few townsfolk present averted their eyes. Blackstone was the region's most prosperous rancher, and none dared cross him. His imposing figure loomed over Clara as she struggled to rise on wobbly legs. "Here now, what's this about?" A deep voice cut through the tension. Clara looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. As he stepped closer, she made out a man in his late 20s, broad-shouldered and lean, with kind eyes that contrasted with his rugged appearance. His dark brown hair curled slightly at the collar of his faded blue shirt, and a worn leather vest completed his unmistakably cowboy appearance. "This isn't your concern, Parker," Blackstone spat. "Parker McAllister." Clara had heard whispers about him, a skilled horseman who'd recently purchased the old Miller place east of town, and was turning it into a respectable outfit. "When a man works a woman until she drops in the street, it becomes everyone's concern," Parker replied evenly, his voice carrying the hint of a southern drawl. He knelt beside Clara, gently helping her sit up. "Miss, are you all right?" His touch was startlingly gentle, his calloused hand strong yet careful as it supported her elbow. Clara nodded weakly, embarrassed by the public spectacle she'd become. "She's fine," Blackstone interjected. "Just being dramatic to avoid honest work." Parker's jaw tightened. "3 bags of feed and that heavy crate, I watched her struggling with those for 15 minutes while you sat on your wagon. That's not honest work, that's cruelty." A small crowd had begun to gather, and Blackstone shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "You need water," Parker said to Clara, ignoring Blackstone. He produced a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. The cool liquid was heavenly against her parched throat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Clara," Blackstone barked, "get up now or don't bother coming back to the ranch." Parker stood to his full height, which was several inches taller than Blackstone. "Sounds to me like she'd be better off taking that option." "And do what? Starve?" Blackstone laughed cruelly. "No one else will hire damaged goods." "I will," Parker said simply. The declaration hung in the air, surprising even him. "Come work for someone who cares about their people, Miss Richards. Fair pay, regular meals, and Sundays off." Clara stared at him in disbelief. Was this a trick, some cruel joke? Yet the sincerity in his eyes seemed genuine. "This is absurd," Blackstone sputtered. "You can't just—" "I believe I just did," Parker cut him off. He turned back to Clara. "The choice is yours, Miss Richards. No pressure." Clara glanced between Blackstone's red-faced anger and Parker's steady gaze. 3 years of misery against an uncertain future with a stranger who had shown her more kindness in 3 minutes than Blackstone had in 3 years. I accept your offer, Mr. McAllister," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You'll regret this," Blackstone threatened, pointing a gnarled finger at her. "Both of you." Parker helped Clara to her feet. "My wagon's hitched outside the general store. If you have belongings to collect, everything I own is in that satchel," Clara said, nodding toward the small leather bag beside Blackstone's wagon. Parker retrieved it before Blackstone could object. "Then let's get you settled." As they walked away, Clara felt an unfamiliar sensation blooming in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it. Hope. Parker's ranch was modest compared to Blackstone's sprawling operation, but as they approached in his wagon, Clara couldn't help but notice how much more welcoming it appeared. The house was small but well-maintained, with a porch that wrapped around two sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and unlike Blackstone's barren yard, this one had flowers growing alongside the path to the door. "It's not much," Parker said apologetically as he helped her down from the wagon. "Been working on it for about a year now." "It's lovely," Clara replied honestly. Inside, the main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall. The furnishings were simple but comfortable: a pine table with 4 chairs, a sofa covered in faded blue fabric, and bookshelves filled with an impressive collection of volumes. "You read?" Clara asked, surprised. Parker smiled sheepishly. "My mother was a schoolteacher. Some habits stick with you." He gestured to a closed door. "That'll be your room. It's small, I'm afraid." Clara followed him to what turned out to be a snug bedroom with a single bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking a grove of cottonwoods. "This is for me?" she asked incredulously. At Blackstone's, she'd slept on a thin pallet in the kitchen. "Of course, I'll leave you to rest. You must be exhausted." Parker paused at the door. "There's a wash basin and fresh water on the dresser. Take your time. Supper won't be for another hour." After he left, Clara sank onto the bed, its softness nearly bringing tears to her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept on a real mattress. Her body ached from years of hard labor, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to truly rest. Later, after washing up and changing into her one clean dress, a simple brown cotton garment that had seen better days, Clara ventured out to the kitchen. Parker stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled deliciously of beef and vegetables. "Can I help?" she asked tentatively. He turned, seeming pleased to see her. "Already feeling better?" "Yes, thank you, but I should earn my keep." Parker frowned slightly. "You don't need to prove anything tonight, Miss Richards. You're recovering." "Clara, please," she insisted, "and I'd rather be useful." Understanding crossed his face. "Fair enough, Clara. Would you mind slicing that bread?" They worked together in companionable silence. Clara marveled at how different this felt from cooking in Blackstone's kitchen, where tension always hung in the air. "You live alone?" she asked eventually, setting the table as Parker dished up the stew. "Just me and Hank," he replied. At her questioning look, he grinned. "You'll meet him tomorrow. He helps with the cattle, only other hand I can afford right now. Lives in the bunkhouse out back." Over dinner, Parker explained his operation. Unlike Blackstone's massive cattle ranch, Parker ran a modest outfit with plans to breed and train quarter horses alongside his small herd. "I've always had a way with horses," he explained, his eyes lighting up. "My pa was a cavalry man before he settled down, taught me everything I know." "And your parents," a shadow crossed his face, "lost them both to typhoid 5 years back in Missouri. Decided to head west after that, make a fresh start." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "I lost my parents too. Father in the war, mother to pneumonia when I was 17. Parker nodded in understanding. "It's a hard world. Makes the kindness we find all the more precious." That night, Lying in a real bed for the first time in years, Clara stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. What if Parker McAllister proved to be just another Jeremiah Blackstone once she was established here? What if his kindness was merely a facade? Yet something in her gut told her this man was different. The gentle respect in his eyes held no deceit she could detect. Sleep eventually claimed her, and for once, her dreams weren't haunted by dread of the coming dawn. The rooster's crow woke Clara at first light, and years of habit had her dressed and in the kitchen before she remembered she wasn't at Blackstone's anymore. She found eggs and bacon in Parker's well-stocked pantry and had breakfast nearly ready when he emerged from his bedroom, looking surprised. "You're up early," he observed, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd brewed. "Old habits," she replied with a small smile. "I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" He took a bite of the perfectly cooked eggs and closed his eyes appreciatively. "I might have to give you a raise already." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. No one had praised her cooking in years. After breakfast, Parker showed her around the property. The barn housed 6 horses, 2 working animals, and 4 that Parker was training. The small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. Clara met Hank Peterson, a grizzled man in his 50s with a limp and a friendly demeanor. "Mighty pleased to meet you, Miss Clara," he said, tipping his hat. "The boss said he'd hired a housekeeper, but he didn't mention she was so pretty." Clara blushed deeply, unused to compliments. Parker cleared his throat. "Hank, that fence in the north pasture still needs mending." "Sure thing, boss," Hank replied with a knowing smile before limping away. "Sorry about that," Parker said once Hank was out of earshot. "He means well." "It's all right," Clara assured him. "Now, what would you like me to do first?" Parker hesitated. "Clara, I want to be clear about something. I hired you because no one should be treated the way Blackstone treated you, not because I expect you to work yourself to the bone. Your duties are cooking, cleaning the house, and laundry. Nothing more unless you choose to take it on." Clara stared at him, disbelieving. "That's all." "That's plenty," he replied firmly. "And you'll have Sundays completely off, as promised." The contrast to Blackstone's endless demands left Clara momentarily speechless. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you." In the weeks that followed, Clara settled into a routine that felt almost luxurious compared to her previous life. She rose early, prepared meals, kept the house in order, and did the washing. The work was honest and satisfying, especially with Parker's frequent thanks and appreciation. She also discovered a joy she'd almost forgotten: having time to herself. In the afternoons, when her chores were done, she often sat on the porch with one of Parker's books or walked along the creek that ran through the property. Parker, she learned, was a fair employer and a genuinely decent man. He worked alongside Hank rather than merely giving orders. In the evenings, he often shared stories of his travels or discussed books they'd both read. Clara found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, to the thoughtful questions he asked about her opinions. One evening in late June, about a month after Clara had arrived, she was preparing supper when Parker came in from the fields earlier than usual. "There's a storm coming," he explained, washing up at the basin. "Felt it in my bones." Sure enough, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. By the time they finished eating, the wind had picked up considerably, driving the first fat raindrops against the windows. "I'd better check on the horses," Parker said, rising from the table. "I'll come with you," Clara offered impulsively. Parker looked uncertain. "It's getting nasty out there." "I'm not made of sugar," she replied with more confidence than she'd felt in years. "I won't melt." His smile was worth the soaking they received on the short dash to the barn. Inside, the horses were restless, sensing the approaching storm. Parker moved from stall to stall, speaking in low, soothing tones to each animal. Clara watched him, struck by the gentle way he handled these powerful creatures. Blackstone had always approached his livestock with the same bullying manner he used with people, but Parker's methods were entirely different. "They respond better to kindness," Parker explained when he caught her watching. "Just like people." Thunder crashed directly overhead, making Clara jump. One of the horses, a chestnut mare, whinnied in distress. "Easy, Penny," Parker murmured, stroking the horse's neck. He glanced at Clara. "Would you like to help?" He guided Clara's hand to the mare's velvety nose. "Just let her get your scent. That's it." The connection was immediate and profound. The horse's large, intelligent eyes seemed to look straight into Clara's soul as she gently stroked its face. "She likes you," Parker observed, standing close enough that Clara could feel the warmth radiating from his body. When she looked up, his expression had changed, become more intense. For a long moment they stood frozen, the air between them charged with something Clara didn't dare name. Then lightning flashed, illuminating the barn in harsh white light, breaking the spell. "We should head back before it gets worse," Parker said, his voice slightly rough. They waited for a break in the downpour, but the storm showed no signs of relenting. Finally, Parker removed his coat. "Here," he said, draping it around Clara's shoulders, ready to make a run for it. They dashed through the torrent, arriving at the house breathless and laughing despite being soaked to the skin. Clara's dress clung to her figure, and she became suddenly conscious of Parker's gaze. "You should change before you catch cold," he said, his voice strangely tight. "I'll stoke the fire." Later, wearing her nightgown and wrapped in a quilt, Clara returned to find Parker similarly changed, the fire blazing cheerfully in the hearth. "I made tea," he said, gesturing to 2 steaming cups on the small table between the chairs facing the fireplace. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Clara felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. The warmth of the fire, the security of the sturdy house, and Parker's reassuring presence combined to create a sense of peace she'd almost forgotten could exist. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Parker looked up from the fire. "For the tea, for everything," Clara clarified. "For saving me that day in town, for giving me this chance, for—" She struggled to articulate the depth of her gratitude. "For treating me like a person worth caring about." Parker's expression softened. "You are worth caring about, Clara, more than you know." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The storm passed overnight, leaving behind a freshly washed world. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through her window and birdsong filling the air. She dressed quickly, eager to start the day, and was surprised to find the kitchen empty. Usually Parker was up before her, starting the coffee. She stepped onto the porch and spotted him by the corral, working with a young bay gelding. Even from a distance, she could see the patience in his movements as he guided the horse in a circle, teaching it to respond to subtle cues. The sight stirred something in Clara's chest: admiration, certainly, but also a deeper feeling she wasn't ready to name. She returned to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, humming softly to herself. Later that morning, as Clara hung laundry in the yard, she noticed a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. As it drew closer, she recognized Jeremiah Blackstone's wagon, and her stomach knotted with dread. Parker emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of approaching wheels, and came to stand protectively beside her. "Clara," he said quietly, "you don't have to speak to him if you don't want to." "It's all right," she replied, though her heart raced. "I can handle Blackstone." The wagon pulled up and Blackstone climbed down, his face thunderous. He was accompanied by a younger man Clara recognized as Timothy Wells, the son of Red Cloud's only attorney. "McAllister," Blackstone called, striding toward them. "I've come for what's mine." Parker stepped slightly in front of Clara. "Nothing here belongs to you, Blackstone," the older man sneered. "The girl owes me. 3 years of room and board, clothes, supplies, all advanced against her wages. She left without settling her debt." Clara felt her face flush with anger. "Debt? You worked me 16 hours a day for pennies. If anyone owes anything, it's you who owe me." "You signed a contract," Blackstone countered, nodding to Timothy, who produced a document from his satchel. "A contract signed by a desperate orphan who had no idea what she was agreeing to," Parker replied evenly. "I doubt it would stand up to proper scrutiny." Timothy Wells cleared his throat nervously. "The document appears legally binding, Mr. McAllister. Miss Richards agreed to work for Mr. Blackstone for 5 years in exchange for room, board, and a small stipend." "Let me see that," Parker demanded, holding out his hand for the paper. As he read, his jaw tightened. "This is practically indentured servitude. It can't be legal." "But it is," Blackstone said smugly. "So either the girl comes back with me to fulfill her obligation, or she pays what she owes, $300. The sum was astronomical. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She didn't have even a tenth of that amount. "This is extortion," Parker said, his voice dangerously quiet. Blackstone shrugged. "It's business. I'll give you until the end of the week to decide." He climbed back onto his wagon. "Either the money or the girl, McAllister." As they drove away, Clara's legs gave out and she sank onto the porch steps. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea." Parker sat beside her, still clutching the contract. "This isn't your fault, Clara, but I should have known. I signed it without truly reading it." Tears of frustration burned her eyes. "I was just so desperate after Mother died." Men like Blackstone prey on desperation. Parker's voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard as he stared after the retreating wagon. "We'll figure this out." "How?" "I don't have $300, and I never will on a housekeeper's wages." Parker was silent for a long moment. "I'll pay it." Clara stared at him in shock. "What? No, I couldn't possibly let you. I won't let him take you back," Parker interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've been saving to expand the herd, but this is more important." "But your plans can wait," he finished firmly. "Your freedom can't." The simple declaration left Clara speechless. No one had ever put her welfare above their own interests before. The realization that Parker was willing to sacrifice his dreams to help her was overwhelming. "I'll pay you back," she promised. "Every penny." Parker's expression softened. "We'll worry about that later." That evening, after a quiet dinner, Parker took the account ledger from its shelf and began calculating figures. Clara watched him from across the table, noting the furrow of concentration between his brows, the way he absently pushed his hair back from his forehead. "It's not as bad as I feared," he said finally. "I can pay Blackstone without completely emptying my savings, but it will be tight for a while." "I feel terrible about this," Clara admitted. Parker closed the ledger. "Don't. If anyone should feel terrible, it's Blackstone for exploiting you in the first place. Still, I want to help make up the difference. Perhaps I could find additional work in town on my days off." "Absolutely not," Parker replied, more sharply than he intended. At her startled look, he softened his tone. "I mean, you already work hard enough. There are other ways to increase the ranch income." "Such as?" Parker leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "I've been thinking about breeding more horses. There's good money in quality stock, and I have connections from my time working on larger ranches." "Could you teach me about the horses?" Clara asked. "I'd like to be more useful around here." The request seemed to please him. "Of course. We'll start tomorrow." True to his word, Parker began including Clara in his work with the horses. She proved to be a natural, quickly gaining the animals' trust with her gentle touch and calm demeanor. Parker taught her to groom them, lead them, and eventually to ride something she'd never had the opportunity to learn before. On a warm July afternoon, they rode together along the creek that marked the eastern boundary of Parker's property. Clara had progressed to riding Penny, the chestnut mare she'd befriended during the storm. The day was perfect clear blue skies, a gentle breeze and wildflowers nodding in the tall grass. "You're becoming quite the horsewoman," Parker observed, watching Clara confidently guide her mount around a fallen log. She smiled, pleasure warming her at his praise. "I have a good teacher." They dismounted by the creek to let the horses drink and rest. Clara removed her bonnet, enjoying the sun on her face. 3 months ago, she would have worried about her complexion darkening, but now she found she didn't care. The fresh air and better diet had restored her health. Her cheeks had filled out and her eyes had regained their sparkle. Parker was watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "What?" she asked self-consciously. "You look happy," he said simply. Clara considered this. "I am happy. Happier than I can remember being in a very long time." Something shifted in Parker's eyes. He took a step toward her, then hesitated. "Clara," the sound of approaching hooves interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. They turned to see Hank riding toward them at a gallop. "Boss," he called, "you're needed back at the ranch. Sheriff's there with Blackstone." Parker's expression hardened. "Stay here," he told Clara. "No," she replied firmly. "This concerns me. I'm coming with you." They rode back quickly, finding Sheriff James Miller and Jeremiah Blackstone waiting in the yard. A third man Clara didn't recognize stood slightly apart, observing the scene with interest. "What's this about?" Parker asked as he dismounted. Sheriff Miller looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Blackstone says you're harboring his employee unlawfully, says she owes him money." "We're aware of his claims," Parker replied evenly. "I informed him I would settle any legitimate debts by the end of the week." "Legitimate?" Blackstone scoffed. "The contract is legal and binding." The stranger stepped forward. "Perhaps I might offer an opinion on that." Sheriff Miller nodded. "This is Judge Robert Hamilton, visiting from Lincoln." Clara's heart pounded as the judge extended his hand for the contract, which Blackstone reluctantly provided. Judge Hamilton read it carefully, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, he looked up, fixing Blackstone with a stern gaze. "This document, sir, while cleverly worded, amounts to debt peonage, a practice increasingly viewed as contrary to the 13th Amendment." Blackstone sputtered. "That's ridiculous. She agreed to the terms, did she?" Judge Hamilton turned to Clara. "Miss Richards, were you fully informed of the nature of this agreement when you signed it?" Clara straightened her shoulders. "No, Your Honor. Mr. Blackstone told me I would be paid fair wages for reasonable work. The actual terms were never explained." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Blackstone, contracts obtained through misrepresentation are not enforceable. Furthermore, the conditions described by Miss Richards' 16-hour workdays, insufficient food and rest could constitute cruel treatment." "She's lying," Blackstone protested. "No, she ain't," came a new voice. Everyone turned to see Martha Jenkins, who ran the general store in town, approaching from the road. Behind her were several other townspeople Clara recognized. "We've all seen how that girl was treated," Martha continued. "Worked to the bone, half-starved, never allowed a moment's rest." Murmurs of agreement rose from the small crowd. Clara was astonished to see so many people coming to her defense, people who had witnessed her suffering, but had never intervened. Judge Hamilton turned back to Blackstone. In light of these testimonies, I am inclined to void this contract entirely. However, to avoid further legal entanglements, I suggest a settlement." Blackstone's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "What kind of settlement?" $50 seems fair compensation for any legitimate expenses," the judge said. "Payable today with all parties agreeing the matter is then closed permanently." 50, Blackstone exploded. "The girl owes me 6 times that. Take it or leave with nothing," Judge Hamilton replied sternly. "And be grateful. I'm not recommending charges for your treatment of this young woman." Blackstone glared at Clara with naked hatred, but finally nodded jerkily. Parker immediately retrieved the money from the house, and the transaction was completed under the judge's watchful eye. "This isn't over," Blackstone hissed as he pocketed the money. "Yes, it is," Sheriff Miller said firmly. "Judge Hamilton's ruling is clear. Miss Richards is free of any obligation to you, and you would be wise to leave her be." As Blackstone stomped back to his wagon, the small crowd dispersed, several people pausing to offer Clara kind words or pats on the shoulder. She was overwhelmed by the unexpected support, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't understand," she said when only Parker, Hank, and the judge remained. "Why did they come?" "Martha organized it," Hank explained. "Word got around that Blackstone was making trouble, and folks decided it was time to speak up. People aren't always as indifferent as they seem," Judge Hamilton added gently. "Sometimes they just need an opportunity to do the right thing." After the judge and sheriff departed, Clara sat on the porch steps, trying to absorb what had happened. She was free, truly free for the first time in years. Parker sat beside her. "How does it feel?" "Overwhelming," she admitted. "I've been living under his shadow for so long, I'm not sure I know how to be without it." "You'll figure it out," he assured her. "And you have time now." Clara turned to him, suddenly realizing. "The money you only had to pay $50 instead of $300, Parker smiled. "Looks like we won't have to delay those expansion plans after all." Impulsively, Clara threw her arms around him. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for everything." Parker's arms came around her hesitantly, then with more certainty, holding her close. "You're welcome, Clara." The embrace lasted longer than propriety strictly allowed, but Clara couldn't bring herself to care. In Parker's arms, she felt safe, valued, and something else a fluttering in her chest that both frightened and excited her. When they finally separated, Parker's eyes held that same intensity she'd noticed in the barn during the storm. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, but instead he stood and offered her his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go see about those horses." August brought sweltering heat to Nebraska, the kind that seemed to press down from above and radiate up from the earth simultaneously. Clara adapted her routine, rising before dawn to complete the most demanding chores before the worst of the heat set in. She'd learned to cook, using the outdoor fire pit to avoid making the house unbearable. Parker's plan to expand his horse breeding operation was progressing well. He'd acquired 2 more mares and had arrangements to purchase a stallion with an impressive bloodline from a ranch in Kansas. Clara had become an integral part of the horse training, showing a particular talent for gentling the more nervous animals. She'd also begun helping with the cattle, much to Hank's approval. "Girls got a natural way with animals," he told Parker one evening as they sat on the porch. "Better than most men I've worked with." Clara, bringing coffee to the men, felt a flush of pride at the compliment. She'd never considered herself particularly skilled at anything beyond basic household tasks. "She certainly does," Parker agreed, his eyes following her as she moved back to the kitchen. Later that night, unable to sleep in the stifling heat, Clara slipped outside. The air was marginally cooler and the moon cast enough light to see by. She walked barefoot through the grass toward the creek, hoping to find relief in the water. The creek was low due to the summer drought but still flowed steadily. Clara hiked up her nightdress and waded in, sighing with pleasure as the cool water swirled around her calves. She bent to splash water on her face and arms. Couldn't sleep either. Clara whirled around to see Parker standing on the bank, wearing only his trousers. His chest was bare in the moonlight, and Clara quickly averted her eyes, suddenly conscious of her own state of undress. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have asked permission, Clara," he interrupted gently. "This is your home too. You don't need permission to cool off on a hot night. Your home too." The words settled around her heart. In the 3 months since coming to work for Parker, she had indeed begun to think of the ranch as home, but hearing him say it aloud gave the feeling a new solidity. Parker waded into the creek, keeping a respectful distance. "The water feels wonderful." Clara nodded, still not quite meeting his eyes. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled only by the gentle splash of water and the chorus of night insects. "I've been meaning to talk to you," Parker said finally. Something in his tone made Clara look up. His expression was serious, almost nervous. "About what?" she asked, her heart beginning to race. "About the future." He took a deep breath. "Your future, specifically?" A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the creek water washed over Clara. Was he letting her go? Had she done something wrong? "I see," she managed to say, her voice small. "No, I don't think you do." Parker moved closer, close enough that she could see the droplets of water glistening on his skin in the moonlight. "Clara, you've become much more than just my housekeeper." Her breath caught. "I have. You know you have," he said softly. "You're my partner in this place now. You understand the horses as well as I do. You've made this house a home." Clara's heart pounded so hard she was sure he must hear it. "Parker, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care for you. More than I should, perhaps, given our arrangement." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of nervousness. "And I'm hoping you might feel something similar." The world seemed to still around them. The confession she'd hardly dared hope for hung in the air between them like a fragile, precious thing. "I do," she whispered finally. "I have for some time now." Relief and joy transformed Parker's face. He reached for her hand under the water, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I've been fighting these feelings, telling myself it wouldn't be proper given that I'm your employer. And I've been telling myself you could never see me as anything but a charity case you rescued," Clara admitted. Parker's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "Is that what you think?" "Clara, from the moment I saw you in town that day, I was drawn to your courage. You collapsed from exhaustion and still got back up, still held your head high. You're the strongest person I know." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes at his words. All her life, she'd been told she was weak, inadequate. To be seen this way as strong, as valuable, was overwhelming. "May I kiss you?" Parker asked, his voice husky. Unable to speak, Clara nodded. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and hers went around his neck. The kiss deepened, awakening sensations Clara had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Parker rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." Clara smiled. "I've been wanting you to." They stood wrapped in each other's arms in the middle of the creek, the cool water swirling around their legs, the moon bathing them in silver light. It was a perfect moment, one Clara knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "I should get back to the house," she said reluctantly after a while. "It's late." Parker nodded, though he seemed equally reluctant to end their time together. "May I call on you properly? I know it sounds ridiculous since we live in the same house, but I want to court you the right way." The formality was endearing. "Yes, you may," Clara replied with a small smile, though it might cause quite a stir in town, the rancher courting his housekeeper. "Let them stir," Parker said firmly. "I don't care what anyone thinks as long as you're happy." They walked back to the house hand in hand, parting at Clara's bedroom door with one more gentle kiss. "Good night, Clara," Parker whispered. "Good night," she replied, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. As the summer waned, Parker courted Clara with a thoroughness that touched her deeply. He brought her wildflowers, took her on picnics by the creek, and read poetry to her in the evenings. On Sundays, he escorted her to church in town, proudly introducing her to everyone as Miss Clara Richards rather than my housekeeper. The town's reaction was mixed. Some, like Martha Jenkins, were openly supportive. Others viewed their relationship with suspicion or disapproval. Clara overheard whispered comments about that Blackstone girl and improper arrangements. "Don't let it trouble you," Parker advised when he noticed her distress after a particularly pointed snub from the banker's wife. "Their opinions don't matter." "But they do," Clara insisted. "This is your community. I don't want to damage your standing here." "Any standing that depends on ignoring my heart isn't worth having," he replied firmly. September brought cooler weather and the arrival of the stallion Parker had purchased. He was a magnificent animal 16 hands high with a glossy black coat and intelligent eyes. "He's beautiful," Clara breathed, watching from outside the corral as Parker worked with the horse. "He'll sire some fine foals," Parker agreed. "I'm thinking of calling him Midnight." "Original," Clara teased, making Parker laugh. "Sometimes the simplest names are best," he defended with a grin. As autumn progressed, so did their relationship. The kisses they shared grew more passionate, the touches more lingering. Clara found herself thinking of Parker at odd moments throughout the day, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength of his hands as he worked with the horses, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her. In October, Parker took Clara to the Harvest Festival in town. It was a grand affair with dancing, games, and food aplenty. Clara wore her best dress, a blue calico that Parker had insisted on buying for her, despite her protests about the expense. "You look beautiful," he told her as he helped her down from the wagon. Under the lantern-lit tent set up in the town square, they danced to fiddle music, Clara's heart soaring with each turn. She'd never attended such festivities before. Blackstone had never allowed it, and the joy of the experience was heightened by sharing it with Parker. During a break in the dancing, Parker led her away from the crowd, toward a quiet corner of the square where a large oak tree provided privacy. "I have something to ask you," he said, his expression suddenly serious. Clara's pulse quickened. "Yes." Parker took both her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and joy to my home in ways I never expected." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. Then, to Clara's astonishment, he dropped to one knee. "Clara Richards, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The world seemed to stop. Clara stared down at Parker's upturned face, at the hope and love shining in his eyes, and felt tears begin to stream down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Parker, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he rose and pulled her into his arms. The kiss they shared was full of promise and passion, a seal on the commitment they'd just made to each other. When they returned to the festival, hand in hand with matching smiles, Martha Jenkins took one look at them and clapped her hands in delight. "Well, it's about time," she exclaimed, pulling Clara into a hug. "When's the wedding?" Word spread quickly through the gathering. Most offered congratulations, though Clara noticed a few disapproving glances. She was past caring, too happy to be affected by others' judgment. Later that night, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, Clara leaned her head against Parker's shoulder. "When should we marry?" He covered her hand with his own. "I was thinking before Christmas. Unless you want more time to prepare." Clara shook her head. "I don't need a grand wedding. Just you and me and a few friends would be perfect." "Then Christmas it is," Parker agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A new beginning as the year ends." The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations. Clara sewed her wedding dress with Martha's help, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored fabric with lace trim. Parker built an addition to the house, expanding Clara's small bedroom into a proper master chamber for them both. Hank, who had become like family to Clara, offered to give her away at the ceremony. "Seeing as you ain't got no kin," he explained gruffly, "if you'd allow me the honor." Clara had hugged him, deeply touched. "I'd be proud to have you stand in for my father, Hank." As December arrived, bringing with it the first snowfall, Clara found herself reflecting on the incredible turn her life had taken. A year ago, she'd been trapped in what felt like a hopeless situation, working herself to exhaustion for a man who valued her no more than his livestock. Now she was preparing to marry a man who treated her with respect and love, becoming mistress of a ranch she'd helped build, with prospects that grew brighter each day. The night before the wedding, Parker insisted on staying in town, honoring the tradition that the groom shouldn't see the bride on their wedding day until the ceremony. "It seems silly when we've lived under the same roof for months," Clara protested. "Maybe," Parker admitted. "But I want to do this right. Give you the proper wedding you deserve." After he left, Clara wandered through the quiet house, touching the familiar objects that had become part of her daily life. Parker's books on the shelf, the quilt they often shared on cool evenings by the fire, the china cups they drank coffee from each morning. Tomorrow, she would return not as a housekeeper but as Parker's wife, his partner in every sense. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. Marriage was a leap of faith, even when you loved someone as deeply as she loved Parker. What if she disappointed him? What if the passion between them faded? Yet when she remembered the steadiness of Parker's gaze, the patience with which he'd courted her, the gentleness of his touch, her doubts receded. He had proven himself trustworthy in every way. If anyone deserved her faith, it was Parker McAllister. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the winter sun casting a golden glow over the snow-covered landscape. Martha arrived early to help Clara dress, bringing with her a small bouquet of hothouse flowers, a luxury in December. "A gift from several of us ladies in town," she explained. "Every bride deserves flowers on her wedding day." The church was decorated simply but beautifully with evergreen boughs and red berries. As Hank escorted her down the aisle, Clara saw only Parker, standing tall and handsome in his best suit, his eyes filled with love as he watched her approach. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged the rings Parker had ordered from St. Louis, simple gold bands that represented their enduring commitment. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Parker's kiss was tender yet filled with promise. The small reception was held at the ranch, the house warmed by a blazing fire and filled with the laughter of the few close friends they'd invited. Hank had outdone himself decorating the main room with more evergreens and candles, creating a festive atmosphere. As evening fell and the guests departed, Clara found herself alone with Parker for the first time as his wife. He took her hands, drawing her close. "Happy Mrs. McAllister?" he asked softly. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. Their first night together as husband and wife was everything Clara had dreamed of, tender, passionate, and filled with discoveries. Parker's patience and gentleness helped ease her natural nervousness, and in his arms, she found a fulfillment she hadn't known existed. Winter passed in a blur of domestic contentment. They settled into married life easily, their previous living arrangement having already established many of their routines. The difference now was the intimacy they shared, the freedom to express their love openly. Parker continued to expand the ranch, adding more cattle and developing his horse breeding program. Clara took on more responsibility with the animals while maintaining the household. They worked as true partners, each contributing their strengths to build their future together. In February, during a particularly harsh blizzard, Clara discovered she was expecting. She waited until they were snowed in for the third day, sitting together by the fire after supper. "I have news," she said, her heart fluttering with excitement. Parker looked up from his book. "What kind of news?" "The kind that means we'll need to prepare a nursery by autumn." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Parker's face transformed with wonder. "You're with child," Clara nodded, smiling through sudden tears. "Due in September, I think." Parker gathered her into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "A baby," he murmured against her hair. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. Clara remained active, continuing her work with the horses and household duties, though Parker insisted she rest more as her condition became apparent. "You're carrying precious cargo," he would say, guiding her to a chair with tender authority. By summer, Clara's belly was rounded prominently beneath her dresses. Parker loved to place his hand on it, feeling the baby kick and move. "He's strong," Parker declared after a particularly vigorous movement. Clara corrected with a smile. "I think it's a girl." "Either way," Parker said, kissing her forehead, "the child will be perfect because it's ours." Their son was born on a crisp September morning after a relatively easy labor. With Martha serving as midwife and Parker pacing anxiously outside until the final moments, Clara brought their child into the world with the same determination she approached everything. "He has your eyes," she told Parker as he held their son for the first time, his large hands cradling the tiny bundle with infinite care. "And your strength," Parker replied, his voice thick with emotion. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names for months but hadn't settled on a final choice. Now, looking at the perfect little face, Clara knew. "James," she said. "After my father." "James McAllister," Parker tested the name. "It's perfect." Life with a newborn was exhausting but filled with joy. Parker proved to be a devoted father, often taking James from Clara to allow her to rest, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. "Most men wouldn't do half of what you do," Clara observed one night as Parker rocked James back to sleep after a feeding. He looked surprised. "Why not? He's my son too." His simple answer embodied everything Clara loved about him: his fairness, his willingness to share burdens, his rejection of conventions that didn't serve the greater good. As James grew, so did the ranch's prosperity. Parker's breeding program had begun to pay off, with his horses gaining a reputation for quality throughout the region. They hired 2 more hands to help with the expanding operation, building another bunkhouse to accommodate them. By the time James celebrated his first birthday, Clara was expecting their second child. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and fatigue. Parker shouldered more responsibilities, worried about her health. "We should hire a girl to help with the house," he suggested one evening as Clara sat exhausted after putting James to bed. "We don't need the expense," she protested weakly. Parker knelt before her chair, taking her hands. "Clara, you've worked hard your entire life. There's no shame in accepting help, especially now. We can afford it." Remembering how she'd once collapsed from overwork on Red Cloud's Main Street, Clara reluctantly agreed. They hired Abigail Foster, a sensible young woman newly arrived from Ohio. She proved to be a godsend, taking over much of the housework and helping with James, allowing Clara to rest as her pregnancy advanced. Their daughter, Elizabeth Martha McAllister, arrived in February 1882 during a howling blizzard. The birth was difficult, leaving Clara weak and fevered for days afterward. Parker barely left her side, his face lined with worry as he tended to both her and the newborn while Abigail cared for James. "Don't you dare leave me," he whispered one night when her fever was at its highest. "I can't do this without you, Clara." Whether it was his desperate plea or her own determination, Clara's fever broke the next morning. Recovery was slow, but by spring, she was regaining her strength, able to enjoy her growing family. Elizabeth, or Lizzie as they came to call her, was a peaceful baby with Clara's hazel eyes and a tuft of dark hair like Parker's. James, now a sturdy toddler with boundless energy, was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help with her care. As Clara watched Parker teaching James to ride his first pony, a gentle old mare he'd acquired specifically for this purpose, she reflected on how far they'd come. 5 years ago, she'd been trapped in what amounted to servitude, her spirit nearly broken by Jeremiah Blackstone's cruelty. Now she was mistress of a prosperous ranch, married to a man who valued and respected her, mother to 2 beautiful children. "Mama, look," James called, beaming with pride as he sat straight in the small saddle, Parker's hand steady on the lead rope. "I see you, darling. You're doing wonderfully." Clara called back, adjusting Lizzie on her hip. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Parker and Clara sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I received a letter today," Parker said, "from a rancher in Wyoming Territory. He wants to buy 3 of our yearlings and possibly the stud rights to Midnight." "That's wonderful news," Clara replied. "Your breeding program is really gaining recognition." Parker nodded, looking thoughtful. "It also mentioned that there's good land available up there. Cheaper than here, with plenty of water and grass." Clara turned to him, surprised. "Are you thinking of moving?" "Just considering possibilities," he said, taking her hand. "The ranch is doing well, but we're limited by the land we have here, if we wanted to expand significantly." "Wyoming," Clara said, testing the word. Once, the thought of leaving Red Cloud would have terrified her. It was the only home she'd ever known. But now her home was wherever Parker and the children were. Would it be very different from here? Bigger country, fewer people, more opportunities, perhaps. Parker squeezed her hand. "It's just an idea at this point. I wouldn't consider it without your full agreement." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I trust your judgment, Parker. If you think it would be best for our family, I'm willing to consider it." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" "Yes," she said with a smile, "but I never tire of hearing it. I love you, Clara McAllister, more today than yesterday and not as much as I will tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, "for saving me that day in town, for giving me a chance at a real life, for being the kind of man who cares." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars twinkle overhead, the future stretching before them like an open road, full of possibilities. 6 years later, the McAllister Ranch in Wyoming Territory was thriving. The move had been challenging but ultimately rewarding. Their new home, nestled in a valley with a clear stream running through it and mountains rising in the distance, offered everything they'd hoped for: abundant grazing land, pure water, and room to grow. Parker's horse breeding operation had expanded significantly, with buyers coming from as far as California and Texas. Clara had developed her own expertise, becoming known for her skill in training even the most difficult animals. Their family had grown as well. In addition to 10-year-old James and 8-year-old Elizabeth, they now had 6-year-old twins, Samuel and Sarah, and 2-year-old David. The big house Parker had built when they first arrived was filled with laughter, occasional tears, and the constant activity of a large, loving family. On a warm summer evening in 1888, as they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a picnic by the stream, Parker presented Clara with a small velvet box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. They'd agreed not to exchange gifts, given the expense of sending the older children to school in town. "Open it," Parker urged, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. Inside was a gold locket, beautifully engraved with their initials. When Clara opened it, she found a tiny photograph of all 5 children on one side and a lock of Parker's hair on the other. "It's beautiful," she whispered, deeply touched. Parker helped her fasten it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as you, but I thought you might like something to keep the children close when they are at school." Clara touched the locket, then leaned forward to kiss him. "Thank you. It's perfect." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the valley, they watched their children playing by the water's edge, James teaching David to skip stones, the twins chasing butterflies, Elizabeth reading a book under a cottonwood tree. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life," Clara said softly. "After everything, to have all this happiness." Parker took her hand, his thumb gently caressing her palm. "You deserve every bit of it, Clara, and so much more. We built this together," she reminded him. "Everything we have, we created as partners. That day in Red Cloud when I saw Blackstone working you until you collapsed." Parker's expression darkened at the memory. "I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would change my life." Clara smiled, remembering how desperate she'd felt, how hopeless, and how a single act of kindness had altered her entire future. "And I never imagined the cowboy offering me water would become my husband, the father of my children, the center of my world." As night fell and the first stars appeared overhead, they gathered their sleepy children and headed back to the house that had become their home. Clara carried David, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, while Parker hoisted the twins, one under each arm, making them giggle despite their tiredness. Inside, as they tucked the children into bed one by one, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Parker's intervention that day long ago, for his patience and kindness as she learned to trust again, for the family they'd created together, for a love that had begun with compassion and grown into something deep and enduring. Later, as they lay in their own bed, Parker pulled Clara close. "Happy anniversary, my love." "Happy anniversary," she replied, nestling against him. "Here's to many more." "Many, many more," Parker agreed, his voice soft in the darkness. "I plan to love you for the rest of my days, Clara McAllister. And I'll love you for the rest of mine," she promised. As they drifted toward sleep, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a moment of collapse on a dusty street to this life of abundance. Parker had offered her work with someone who cared, but he'd given her so much more: a partnership, a family, a love that continued to deepen with each passing year. And for that, she would be forever grateful.